bookmarks cleared up in the budget. Madam Speaker, you still had a couple of things to introduce first, take care of.
Yes, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
And the speakers is
on page 44, on the Commission on Decolonization, is that on Section 2, which appropriates the sum of $210,000 for an information program by the Commission on Decolonization and the 3 task force. What I'd like to proffer an amendment that, and you should all have a copy and is underscored, continuing on with the sentence, to say that the funds appropriated in this section shall be distributed as follows: $60,000 to each task force and $30,000 to the COD, and that funds distributed to the task forces shall be expended exclusively as advised by the task forces and approved by the vote of the COD. The unexpended balance of funds appropriated in this section shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended. And the reason for that particular, the ending there, was that because I know earlier we had said that the governor at least had stated that he wanted to have the plebiscite this year, and the task forces were preparing for that and started to, or tried to procure a lot of the materials and services that they needed, and we're having a difficult time. So that's why we want to make sure that with this, then, that the unexpended balance of the funds appropriated then shall not lapse. So that's the first amendment, and dividing it up. We actually have done that in the commission itself, but this specifically, we wanted to make sure that it is done legislatively.
Thank you. On the Speaker's amendment, any senator wish to be heard on it? Senator Tom.
I have reservations. Basically, that the third line, that notwithstanding 5 GCA Chapter 5 or any other law shall be expended exclusively. So 5 GCA Chapter 5 is the procurement law. So we're basically just saying, here's 210 grand, go out and, you know, spend it however willy-nilly. And I think this is a bad precedent. Procurement law makes provisions for when you can set aside, the procurement law for in cases of emergency. But this one is just because it's inconvenient to follow the law. I think that sets a bad precedent, and so I caution the body about doing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Any other senator wish to be heard on the amendment and on the concerns stated by Senator Tom Adda? No one? Senator Pro-Respicio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly support Speaker Wambat's amendment. She and I sit on the Commission on Decolonization, and I know that the reason for offering this amendment this way is because meeting after meeting, we've heard from the different status chairs of how difficult it is to do what needs to be done within the confines of the procurement process. For example, they're in a unique position to try to go out and procure services, whether it's for internet services to establish a website or whether it's to procure a laptop. I think what we're trying to do is not give these individuals any more opportunity to come up with so many more reasons why it's taking this long to do what they're mandated to do. They're mandated to do a public education campaign, Mr. Chair, but they're volunteers. And so even their unique position they're in. They're not government of Guam employees. You have a former senator who is chairing the statehood status task force. You have a current Gov Guam employee who is not employed to do this, but he's chairing the Free Association Task Force, and you have a University of Guam professor who is not employed to do the Commission on Decolonization work, but is chairing the Independence Task Force. So, although this amendment is being proposed this way, certainly there are going to be subjected to transparency and accountability, and it's not just giving them a blanket authority without being accountable for how those taxpayer funds are going to be spent. So I join the speaker, as difficult as it may seem to want to do it this way, but let's give them the latitude so that we don't continue to hear them say that they don't have the resources, they don't have the wherewithal, and so we don't keep having this circular argument as to why this great push for self-determination and greater self-government through the whole decolonization process is not going forward. And the administration and Governor Calvo in particular is committed to this process. But I just believe that the feedback we keep getting from these different status task forces is that they're just frustrated. And so I would hope that we try to do it this way, and let's see if they have any more reasons why they're not able to do what they've been asked to do through the various mandates. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Espicio. Any other senator wish to be heard on the WANPAT proposal? Any other senator? Senator Morrison? Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question. Is this an estimated cost or an actual breakdown for the education program?
No. What it is, this is an amount that was submitted by the governor's office for the task forces in anticipation of starting the education program. All I'm doing here is to take that dollar amount and divide it at least equally for the three different task forces, and then leaving a portion of that for the general type of education that the commission itself would be doing, and in addition to allow for Guam to have a presence at the United Nations. And that's all basically I'm doing. It's only what they gave us and just dividing it up, which is something that we've actually done in like this year. We divided it up, and that's exactly what I want to do with the next amendment, is because all of the monies haven't been expended, and they had asked if it could continue on. But it's just a dividing up the money amongst the task forces.
Madam Speaker, you had two amendments, and it's the one with the double underline. Does the double underline under notwithstanding 5GCA? Or are you going back to? Well, you did say that it was to be spent as per the committees, but you didn't read the 5GCA. So I just thought you just skipped over that, but it was be expended exclusively as advised by the task force and the committee. We'll bookmark this and let them figure this out. Any other senator have? Senator Underwood, did you have a bookmark that you wanted to address? It's on page 90 and page 91. Has everybody had a chance to review this list?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe everyone has the list. what we actually have done was change the allotments for each of the schools based on the the request of one mayor. And the first one on the line, if you have the short list, Astumbo Elementary had been increased to 13,887, and that amount, that increase actually came from the decrease of Benevente Middle School, which was decreased based on the request of mayors of ours to 23,712. And so we also had provided an increase to LBJ and to Mooning and JFK, because based on the updated information we received regarding JFK's contractual services, the contractor or the lessor actually is providing the grounds maintenance, and we received that updated information the day after I had tried to proffer an amendment. So now those funds had been reallocated to LBJ and to Mooning, as well as Southern High, because Southern High is in need of an increase in their grounds and maintenance. Machinano Elementary and FBLG were the other schools that received a slight increase. So basically that's that all of those reallocations are within the total amount that had been appropriated or proposed for the mayor's council under section, wait a minute, section 5, grounds maintenance, and the total amount did not change from 481,957.
Thank you. Everybody had a chance to review this list and have any problems with this amendment on page 91? Speaker, have we resolved our?
I'm sorry, you're right. I know that the copy, you're right, you're correct with a double underscore on the notwithstanding.
You're going to have to speak into the microphone, please.
I should ask those guys to increase the volume of this particular mic. The double underscore, you're right. There's a single underscore and then a double underscore. That is the correct version that has my initials on the top.
Does everybody have a copy of that? Go give her one. Go give Tori this. Okay, does everybody have a copy of the one with the double underscore? Senator Tom Atta has some reservations or concerns about the double underscored section, notwithstanding the provision of the procurement law. And
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think maybe one way we can, reach a reasonable compromise here is that after that last word, COD, of the underline, double underline,
yes,
is we put in there a new sentence. Complete records of procurement actions shall be maintained and posted on the website. Who do we call? How much did they bid? And all that stuff. So at least you don't have to go out and, put it out on advertise for bids and all that stuff, but at least maintain records on how you spent that thing.
Complete records of the procurement shall be posted on the website.
Correct.
have no objection to that. That's actually good. I know that what the committee has done is, and the governor's office and their assistants have actually asked the task forces to get 3 price quotations. So that part of it that they're still following. It's just they need to expedite the process a little bit better than what is currently happening.
Okay. So there is an amendment to insert that one sentence. Any objection to it?
No objection, Mr. Chair. However, there is no time deadline to post it. And again, because we leave it open-ended like that, it's conceivable that they could go through the whole process and not post it until a year or 2 later, because there is no deadline. So, I mean, if there are parameters set in terms of the time when they have to post it, I think that if you could just
Anybody
amend.
problem with it being posted within 30 days?
Thank you.
Okay. On the entire WAMPAT provision, any objection with the 2 amendments, the sentence plus the within 30 days? Objection? Thank you. Madam Speaker, you have a second one?
Yes,
on this
which will
section?
be Section 3. And in Section 3 is what we've actually done throughout the budget. In some cases, of course, is that it's a continuing appropriation. And that's for 2016. We have just recently divided up the amounts of money that they had received and given them out to the task forces. I know that 2 of the task forces have not even started to spend their money. Only one task force has already started, and because the process has been long, and then some of them are thinking we want to make sure that we have an actual date to do this, and have asked in our last meeting last week for this continuation only because not all of them, or rather all 3 of them, have not expended their funds this year.
And the money has already been received by the Commission on Decolonization.
Yes.
And the committees have received it, but they haven't spent it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's not going to be taking any money from 17.
Yes.
Any objection to this? Who else had a bookmark that they'd like to address? Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms.
Mr. Chair,
Baldwin.
I think there are 3 areas in which I had asked for a bookmark, and that would be on page 18, section 18, page 25, section 17, and page 29 on section 6. And after review, really the reason we bookmark it because throughout this whole process, I've talked about the concern about prior year obligations and the paying prior year obligations out of 2017 budget, as well as continuing appropriations that probably some of the agencies or entities have not received but have been appropriated for in 2016. And I have no amendments to these bookmarks. I just wanted to at least note that I wanted to continually raise the issue that by allowing these prior year obligations to be paid out of 2017, as well as the continuing appropriations to go forward, that in the coming fiscal year, that anytime there is perhaps some thought to spending more money every time a new dollar shows up, just to remind our colleagues that a lot of that money, that new dollar, is probably already spoken for. So that's the point.
Thank you very much, Senator Spalding,
Thank
and
you.
I appreciate you pointing that out to all of us. I think it's imperative that we all understand that, and forcing even me to learn the distinction between those that have received it and those that have not, and why the difference. And so thank you that those bookmarks have been removed now. Anybody else have a bookmark that's outstanding? I believe Senator Nicholas has asked the chair to announce that the bookmarks that he had wanted, he no longer is going to be pursuing. So we've cleared his bookmarks. I believe The only thing left, does anybody else remember any bookmarks that have been left out? Otherwise, Senator Uggan.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Speaker, and to our fellow colleagues. Just a little bit of explanation. There's a amendment that is being circulated right now, which would make reference to transfers from the Child Support Enforcement Account Limited. And this is an amendment that was proffered by the Attorney General Office in regards to ensuring that these particular funds are used as specified for the purposes set forth. So the Vice Speaker did have a public hearing last evening. I want to thank him and his staff members for being able to prepare the committee report. My understanding is that it was just filed a few minutes ago. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. For purposes of the public, I was just instructed to ensure that they are able to hear what I'm saying. But this is an amendment, Mr. Chairman, that would add a new section 34111.1 to Article 1 of Chapter 34, Title 5, Guam Code annotated to read, transfers on the Child Support Enforcement Account Limited. The Child Support Enforcement Account under the administration of the Department of Administration hereby established, separate and apart from all other funds and accounts of the government of Guam. The account shall be used in accordance with Chapters 34 and 35 of Title 5 Guam Code Annotated and Title 4D of the Social Security Act for purposes related to payment of child support. These funds shall not be transferred or used without the written approval of the Attorney General of Guam. And this is an additional safeguard, recognizing that these funds specifically should go to our children who are anticipating the receipt of these funds so that, in fact, they can provide for their daily livelihood. So, Mr. Chairman, I think it's only prudent that, considering recent incidents with regards to this particular fund, that there be additional safeguards, and this is a recommendation by the Attorney General. So I ask our colleagues for your consideration, please.
Thank you. Senator Respicio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of this amendment, but I'm wondering on the last sentence, the funds shall not be transferred or used without the written approval of the Attorney General of Guam. I'm wondering, instead of providing for limited transfer authority, we should just prohibit it. The sole purpose of this child support fund is to make remittances to custodial parents or to adopted parents or to anyone caring for that child. And so I don't think even the Attorney General should be given the authorization by law that if she deems necessary that those funds can be transferred. So if the author would yield, I'm proposing that we strike the last sentence out and we change limited in the title to prohibited. There's no reason in my mind why these child support payments should be transferred for any other reason other than the purpose related to payment of child support. I don't want to, I commend him for what he's doing, and we want to tighten this up, and I don't want to give any wiggle room to anybody to use these funds otherwise. Otherwise, the Attorney General might be pressured because the cash is there and some emergency arises other than what this fund is for, and if we're going to protect this fund, let's protect it in this kind of manner where we're not limiting those transfers, but just the opposite, we're prohibiting it.
Senator Espaldon.
I have, at this point, I have no objection to that. However, I do need to ask the question, and if the proffer could answer it, or anybody could answer it, and that is if there are funds within the child support fund that have not been able to be released for whatever reason, over years and years, and it's never been, then what happens to the funds there?
It remains in the fund, and the Attorney General's office is making due diligence at this point to try to make sure they can find either the children that it should have gone to or the non-custodial parent who made the contribution so that it can be returned to
and
them.
if they, okay, Okay, I understand. So really, there should be no wiggle room at this point for any of this money.
No, this money is just child support and should remain with child support.
Thank you.
There's been a proposal to strike the last sentence by Senator Spicio. Any objection to striking the last sentence? On the,
Mr. Chair, and also to change limited in the title to prohibited.
and, and there's also an amendment to the title changing limited to prohibited. Any objection? Oh, Senator?
For the author of the amendment, what was contemplated in the last sentence? What circumstance would exist that the Attorney General would need to transfer the funds elsewhere? I'm just trying to understand the logic of why that was put in there in the first place, just in case it's needed for some reason.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Please.
the good senator has an excellent question, and this was one of the inquiries that was made with the Attorney General during the course of a public hearing and a discussion on this particular fund. And we requested, and the chairman, as the oversight for the Attorney General's office, did request for verbiage that would be appropriate in terms of restricting this fund, and this is what was provided by the Attorney General. So it's not an allowance to be able to utilize it for any other purposes, but it was because this was the provision that was forwarded to the legislative body, so I did not want to touch it. But thank you, Senator, for asking that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right. So on the changing of the word from limited to prohibited, on the section, Senator Espaldon, do you wish to be heard on the section? Any objection to its inclusion at the end on page 129? I understand you have a second one, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's being circulated as we speak, and it's in reference, a very similar concept. It's in reference to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Fund when payment is authorized, and this would also amend subsection 161.95 of Chapter 161, Title 8, Guam Code Annotated, to read as follows: Criminal Injuries Compensation Fund when payment authorized. And it will continue to read, there is hereby established a Criminal Injuries Compensation Fund separate and apart from other funds of the government of Guam, from which the Commission may make payments as provided in subsection B of this section. The Attorney General shall be the certifying officer of the fund, and all payments therefrom shall be paid by the Attorney General upon order of the Commission. These funds shall not be transferred or used without the written approval of the Attorney General of Guam. And just for the information of the body, this is not this is another fund that is maintained specifically to support and to assist victims of crimes. And there have been a particular situation a few years back where, in fact, this particular fund was tapped into, and this is just making sure that there's an additional safeguard provision to restrict any transfer from this particular fund other than its established and intended purpose. So I ask for your consideration, and likewise, just for your information, the public hearing was conducted last evening, and I want to thank the Vice Speaker and his staff for completing the committee report as recent as 30 minutes ago and filing it. So thank you very much.
On this provision, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. It says here that there is hereby established a Criminal Injuries Compensation Fund. So my question is, I have several. One is that where are the monies coming from that will go into this specific fund? And if that has been happening, then where is it going to now that we're hereby establishing this specific fund?
This fund was established decades ago by a previous legislature. The commission went defunct for a while, and the current Attorney General has revived it. In her due diligence, she has discovered that in the past it has been raided because it wasn't being used. And she has made every effort to have the administration reimburse the fund, and the money has been placed back into the fund. She has a commission of which she serves as the executive director, executive secretary for the commission, and the commission meets and determines how much money is going to be given. The money is received from restitution that defendants pay. And if other pieces of legislation that are currently in the hopper pass, then there'll be more money going into this from the prison work program, prison industries bill, and so that's how this fund will be funded. But it is from the restitution orders of the court that defendants are supposed to be making payment, and it's supposed to go into this fund. And it's been around since, God, since the...
Well, I'm happy to hear that explanation. So then this fund, since it is then ordered by the court, is not subject to then it, of course, reverting back to the courts, because many of the fines, fees, and and judgments stay.
Yeah, that's earlier in the, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. And the only thing that the Attorney General put was the fund shall not be transferred or used without the written approval by the Attorney General, which, to use a phrase, is redundant since she's the certifying officer and it can only be released after she signs it. So, but that's the way they wrote it, and that's the way we're... Any objection to this section? Any other bookmarks that are still outstanding? Does anybody have anything they want to, while we're... I probably shouldn't do this, but I am. No, I'm just saying, before I close, I just want to make sure that everybody's been taken care of or understands what we have before us. Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. And since no one has any other bookmarks, I'd just like to take this opportunity to congratulate you and thank you for the hard work that you and OFB, your staff, have actually done. This is probably one of the very rare short budget process that we've gone through, and that you've done an excellent job in justifying and showing the numbers and being conservative. And I don't see how anyone can ever fight or go against conservative. I know it seems kind of ironic because people used to think that the Democrats are always the ones who want to spend, and then the Republicans want to be conservative, and here now the Democrats are being conservative and the Republicans are also being just as conservative. Thank you so much to all my colleagues across the aisles for your support.
Madam Speaker, while on behalf of my OFB staff, both my director, Ricky Hernandez, and Bertha, who has been doing this since before some of them have been born, and Selena, Ariana, Edison, and Matthew. I'm really proud of that staff. I mean, not only is Ricky working on his doctorate, but Edison is working on who has a CPA, is trying to make sure that Ricky, Matthew, and Ariana pass their CPA exam within the next year. And I want the OFB staff to be the most professional staff on this island. So, but more importantly, I think the thanks go to all of you. I know it's been hard. It's been a hard pill to swallow, and maybe as was used earlier, it's ironic that we're discussing this week, because the headline today about the impending labor crisis. I don't know whether or not things are as rosy, and maybe we should get this passed before the labor crisis does. At least because in the last CRER that was just issued the day before yesterday, the projections from the administration were that we were going to be short in income tax, in individual and withholding. but there was, for some reason, was a huge increase in corporate tax. I'm not sure what's going to happen this next year, whether or not corporate tax is going to be able to save us. And the BPT, again, I thank all of you for us giving the administration the benefit of the doubt on the growth rate from last year, but this year we took it back down to 4 rather than the 8. And it really is all of you that have held the line and realized that it is some really slim times, and with a $120 million deficit, we have to be as responsible and as conservative as is possible. It would make things so much easier to adopt what was sent and just pass the budget as it was sent in February, but it would not be fulfilling our responsibilities. So my thanks to all of you, and I want to thank all of you also for last year not taking up the banner and trying to do anything with what we did last year, because I think, unfortunately, though I wish that I was wrong, we haven't been. And so, and again, as I've mentioned before, if for some reason there is a great uptick, as we've done with TAF, we've met 2 or 3 times to spend every other million that comes in as it comes in. We'll meet if we have any increase in the general fund and divide it up where it's necessary. But I thank all of you for being willing to believe or accept our revenue projections and assisting us in holding the line this year. But and I'm sure all of you will join me if there is a increase to make sure that the areas that need a little more money do receive a little more money when and if those funds come in. So thank you very much. Senator Espaldon?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. But along those lines, again, I just want to reiterate that when those funds come in, we always have to be aware that we have provided for continuing appropriations and other things that we need to account for that are not really visible right now in the numbers of this budget. But that being said, Mr. Chair, I also want to thank you wholeheartedly. This is, aside from last year, but under your guidance, this budget process has been very enlightening, because in past practices, at least when I was in office prior to this term, the budgets were always thrown on our desk on the same day we're going to discuss it without any opportunity to even review it. But you have been more than gracious enough to give us time prior to us discussing it to be able to at least go through it and to examine it to make sure. And so it was a very transparent process, and I think that bodes well, because all of us were able to speak intelligently to some of the issues that were in here. And for me, I'll speak for myself, it gave me in particular the chance to be able to ask some questions on subjects that I wasn't really knowledgeable of that were included in the budget in the past, because in the past we went through the budget so fast that we really didn't get a chance to really understand what was in it. But I want to thank you, and I want to thank your staff who did an excellent job. And yes, I want to thank you also for the fiscal responsibility and restraint that you've shown and you've advocated for and allowed us to buy into, in terms of making sure that we don't overspend, based upon some projections, that we really have been very conservative in terms of passing this budget or in putting this budget forward. So I just want to again reiterate my thanks.
Thank you very much. Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first and foremost, I want to also extend accolades not only to yourself as the chair of this particular committee and overseeing the entire budget process over the course of the last 3 months. Just being able to have these agencies come in and explain exactly what their requirements are, and acknowledging some of the challenges that they are presently incurring or encountering, certainly brought to light certain requirements in terms of the operations of the government. I also want to extend that kudos to really your staff. Your staff has been very instrumental in terms of providing us the information that we need. You've been very responsive in being as open as you possibly can and as transparent in terms of the numbers and tracking the numbers every single report so that the community, the people of Guam, understand the realities of the cash that this government is receiving on a monthly basis. And that's really where this conservative budget, as presented by yourself and soon to be acted on by this body, certainly the people of Guam understand that, and they know and they recognize some of the challenges that this government is experiencing, but they also recognize that there's a cash situation that has to model any budget that is passed. Mr. Chairman, I still have some serious reservations as it comes to the Guam Police Department. And I've said it repeatedly, that when you're looking at a budget of an agency, one of our critical public safety agencies that is underfunded based on numbers presented during the budget discussions. So looking at that and recognizing that, and then having had to go through after the amendment was proffered to listen to all these other allocations, really was a tremendous challenge on my part, trying to understand where and why some of these funds were needed when in fact the Guam Police Department was in dire need of additional resources. I have to admit that you incorporated some tools in here that in fact the chief executive has the option of using. First, or not the option, but would be required to use and to apply. One is that there will be no reserves set aside. Whether he'll be able to comply with that is a different story, because we set policy and he carries out the cash management of the entire government of Guam. But it really is a concern that I have, knowing full well how the numbers were presented when we dealt with the Guam Police Department, and making some of these other areas a priority versus giving the department the underlying requirement, at least going into the next fiscal year. And if, in case people are questioning, the reality is the chairman provided the Guam Police Department $200,000 additional in this fiscal year budget, fiscal year 17 budget versus fiscal year 16. But the projected expenses for the entire department, especially in light of what the chief and the governor's office had implemented earlier this week, is reassigning and redeploying an additional 30 to 40 uniformed police officers out of these special divisions and getting them out into the precincts, out into the villages to increase their physical presence. In light of that, they're going to need additional resources, whether it be additional weapons, whether it be additional vehicles, additional equipment. They're going to need all these resources to be able to carry out their job. And that's where the challenge comes in, because as the chair of public safety, December 14th is a timeline that we really have to recognize. Unless a community partner steps up and provides the Guam Police Department with either a replacement of 15 vehicles or an additional allowance coming from the community partner right now, Atkins Crow, to allow the continued use of those vehicles, then GPD will be shy 45% of its vehicle fleet, patrol fleet. So if you look at the overall scenario, sending out and reassigning uniformed personnel out into the community, 30 or 40, but then in December, the big challenge of not having patrol vehicles to be able to get out to the streets, that's a reality that we are faced with. And that's why I had advocated for the allocation of additional resources. One of the responses is that if more funding comes in, then we will revisit this. Well, Mr. Chairman, my response to that is, this is the entire fiscal year budget. We are adopting, or we will be acting on a budget for the entire FY, not knowing full well what will transpire over the course of the 12 months. If emergency situation occurs, then, or a natural disaster and there's need for additional resources, then that will pose a challenge in terms of the Guam Police Department being able to sustain the same number of personnel, 320 uniform officers, recruit an additional 20-plus officers, which is right now ongoing, acquire the necessary vehicles, provide them with the equipment and the weapons so that they can properly provide public safety to our people out in the community. That's what it really comes down to. So I recognize some of the tools that have been provided, Mr. Chairman, but I also recognize that when many of these agencies are well-funded, when I say well-funded, if you take a look at the personnel budgetary allocation on a biweekly basis and you project it over the entire fiscal year, then the reality is that's where you always start as your baseline. So some of these agencies are funded, but yet I'm faced, and we are faced with acknowledging that based on the budget discussions and the numbers presented by the chief, who was sworn in, that right now the numbers provided for the Guam Police Department is shy $200,000. A concern that certainly I have, and I certainly hope that our colleagues can share that similar concern, because we do need to do something. And I certainly hope that the revenues will show an uptick over the first quarter, if not the second quarter, and we reach out and provide the much needed funding support, because the number one issue, Mr. Chairman, although we have priorities of education, public safety, and healthcare, to me, the number one issue facing this community at this time is public safety. And all we have to do is read the print, the newspaper over the course of the last 4 days, of which the front page depicted, if not 2 of the last 4 days, or 3 of the last 4 days depicted a situation that required public safety support. So, Mr. Chairman, with that said, I certainly hope that there's an uptick in the revenues, because our Guam Police Department is in need of additional resources for the budget. And it's just unfortunate that we weren't able to address it at this point in time, but I hope that with your guidance and with the concurrence of the members of this body, that eventually we will have to find those resources and give it to our Guam Police Department so that we can assure our visitors, and most especially our entire island community and our residents, that they can feel safe in their island, in their home. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Respicio.
Mr. Chair, given what the previous speaker just said, what he's saying is not news to any one of us. He's been saying that the Guam Police Department is going to be $200,000 short just to make them whole. In these budget deliberations, my understanding is that there were other proposals that were put on the table to alleviate this shortfall, but I guess those proposals weren't moved on. I think for the interest
Mr. Chairman, unless it was publicly placed and discussed,
well, he had an
point of
opportunity.
personal privilege.
Let me finish.
Mr. Chairman, as the chair, unless it was properly placed on the floor, then it was not considered. So in this particular case, I ask the good senator to please refrain from making those statements.
No, and I will continue, because statements that the Guam Police Department is going to be short, when proposals were discussed, didn't make it to the floor. If it didn't make it to the floor, then there was probably no will to bring those initiatives to the floor. But I believe that there was a solution, Mr. Chair, and it's not proper to say that the Guam Police Department is going to be shorted when there were viable proposals, but yet those proposals weren't brought into the floor. And if the oversight chair would have moved on those proposals.
So, Mr. Chairman, what viable, only because he's directing those comments to what I stated a little earlier? I mean, if you want to go back and regurgitate the numbers, Senator, then we will regurgitate the numbers and look that, in fact, based on what was presented during the budget discussion, it reflected that they did not receive what was necessary.
Can we just rise at this point? Is there anything else in the budget that needs to be done? Can we just, a motion to rise? I'll
But
accept it.
how can we rise with the comments made by the previous speaker, Mr. Chair, to say that we've neglected the needs of the Guam Police Department by 200,000 when there was a viable proposal that was discussed, but it wasn't moved? And so if nobody will move it, I'll move it. I'm giving deference to the oversight chair for the Guam Police Department. The oversight chair for the Tourist Attraction Fund has identified some funds that have not been spent from 2016.
I really
And-
do think there is sufficient transfer authority to be able to address everything. Can we
Then,
just
then
rise?
Mr. Chairman, I think we really should go back and address it. If there are
Can we
other
just take a
funding
short
sources,
recess?
Mr. Chairman, that he wants to allude to, then let's bring it up. Because I'm not the only member of this body.
I
who's
have
concerned
So
about
move on
I-
the recess,
wait.
Mr. Chair. Chairman.
I have we're taking a recess.